Well, now we turn to one of the most powerful men in the country, a man who's never given a network television interview. He's Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens. He's 86 years old, and he's now remembering the man who nominated him to the High Court, President Gerald Ford. He spoke to ABC's Jan Crawford Greenberg in a Nightline exclusive.
Sitting in the pew at the National Cathedral this morning, Justice John Paul Stevens reflected on his first meeting with the man who nominated him to the Supreme Court.
And my two very firm impressions of that meeting were, one, he was a fine lawyer, and two, he was the kind of person I would really like to have as a friend, because you like him right away.
Today, Stevens is viewed as one of the Supreme Court's most liberal justices.
Do you think that President Ford was surprised by some of your opinions as a justice?
Well, I'm sure he's surprised at some of them. I mean, I'm surprised at some of the opinions of my colleagues. But over the years, I gather he was not unhappy with the results on the whole.
President Ford was advised by his Attorney General, Ed Levy, that you were a moderate conservative at the time before he nominated you. Did you see yourself that way, as a moderate conservative? And how do you see yourself now?
As a moderate conservative, I don't really think I've changed. I think there have been a lot of changes in the court.
And you once said that you were one of the more conservative members of the court back 15, almost 20 years ago. How do you see yourself now on the court?
Same way.
In 2005, Ford wrote a letter saying, quote, "I am prepared to allow history's judgment to rest exclusively, if necessary, on my nomination 30 years ago of Justice John Paul Stevens to the U.S. Supreme Court."
What'd you do with it?
It's hanging on the wall in my office. It's something I'm very proud of.
How would you like history to judge you?
Well, that's an interesting question. I suppose on the base of the opinions I've written. There's an awful lot of them. They have to pick and choose among them, but you leave your record on what you've had to say over the years.
And what of the man who nominated Stevens to the court?
Well, one thing that he often said, and in his talks and so forth, that I think people should repeat more often, that this is a country in which people can disagree without being disagreeable. He had that way of saying it, which I think makes an awful lot of sense. I try not to be disagreeable in my opinion writing. I think for the most part I succeed.
Jan Crawford Greenberg with Justice Stevens.